The era commonly dubbed the Age of Exploration, spanning from the late 15th to the 19th century, witnessed a dramatic expansion of European powers across the globe. This period was characterized by a fervent quest for new lands, driven by the desire to discover uncharted territories and establish new trade routes. Driven by a thirst for new trade routes, resources, and territories, European nations embarked on ambitious voyages that irrevocably reshaped the world's geopolitical landscape. These voyages were often perilous, with explorers braving unknown seas and facing numerous challenges, including harsh weather conditions and the threat of mutiny. While often romanticized as a period of discovery and progress, this era also marked the beginning of centuries of colonial domination, exploitation, and conflict that continue to cast a long shadow on the world today. The encounters between Europeans and indigenous populations were frequently marked by violence and coercion, leading to profound and often devastating changes for the native peoples. From the Americas to Africa and Asia, European powers established vast empires, subjugating indigenous populations and imposing their political, economic, and cultural systems. These empires were built on the backs of the local populations, who were often forced into labor and subjected to harsh and inhumane treatment. This expansion was fueled by a complex interplay of factors, including technological advancements in navigation and shipbuilding, burgeoning mercantilist ambitions, and a sense of cultural and religious superiority that permeated European societies at the time. The development of new navigation tools and ship designs enabled longer and more accurate voyages, while the mercantilist economic policies of European nations sought to maximize exports and accumulate wealth. The consequences of this expansion were profound, leading to the displacement and decimation of entire populations, the transatlantic slave trade, and the systematic extraction of resources that fueled European industrialization and wealth accumulation. The extraction of resources such as gold, silver, and agricultural products from the colonies played a crucial role in the economic development of Europe. The colonization of the Americas, for instance, resulted in the deaths of millions of indigenous people due to diseases, forced labor, and warfare. The introduction of European diseases, to which the indigenous populations had no immunity, led to catastrophic population declines. The transatlantic slave trade, a particularly horrific chapter in human history, saw millions of Africans forcibly transported to the Americas to work on plantations, enriching European slave traders and plantation owners while leaving an enduring legacy of racism and inequality. The brutal conditions on the slave ships and the harsh realities of plantation life left deep scars on the African diaspora. These early colonial ventures set the stage for centuries of exploitation and conflict, laying the foundation for the global power dynamics that persist to this day. The legacy of the Age of Exploration is still evident in the modern world, influencing contemporary political, economic, and social structures.
The accumulation of wealth by Western powers during the colonial era was achieved through a systematic and often brutal system of resource extraction, forced labor, and economic policies designed to benefit the colonizers at the expense of the colonized. This exploitation was not just a byproduct of colonialism, but a deliberate strategy to maximize profits and control. Vast reserves of natural resources, including gold, silver, diamonds, rubber, timber, and cash crops like sugar, cotton, and tea, were plundered from colonized territories and funneled back to Europe, fueling industrial growth and enriching European elites. These resources were often extracted under harsh and inhumane conditions, with little regard for the well-being of the local populations. One of the key mechanisms of this exploitation was the establishment of plantation economies in many colonized regions. These plantations were vast agricultural enterprises that produced cash crops for export, often at the expense of local food production and sustainability. These large-scale agricultural enterprises relied on the forced labor of enslaved Africans or, in some cases, indigenous populations subjected to various forms of coerced labor. The brutal conditions on these plantations led to high mortality rates and immense suffering. European powers enacted laws and policies that stripped colonized people of their land rights, forcing them into servitude on plantations or in mines. These policies were designed to ensure that the colonized populations remained dependent on the colonial economy and had little opportunity to improve their circumstances. This system of forced labor ensured a steady supply of cheap raw materials for European industries, while simultaneously generating immense profits for plantation owners and colonial administrations. The wealth generated from these enterprises was used to further entrench colonial control and expand European influence globally. Beyond outright slavery, colonial powers implemented various forms of forced or indentured labor. These systems often involved long-term contracts that bound laborers to work under oppressive conditions with little hope of escape or improvement. In many parts of Africa and Asia, colonial authorities imposed taxes payable only in cash, forcing local populations to work for European companies or on plantations to earn the necessary funds. This taxation system was another tool of economic control, ensuring that the colonized populations remained tied to the colonial economy. This system, often referred to as taxation in kind, effectively trapped colonized people in a cycle of debt and dependence, ensuring a steady supply of cheap labor for colonial enterprises. The economic hardship imposed by these taxes further entrenched the power dynamics between the colonizers and the colonized. These practices of resource extraction and labor exploitation formed the backbone of the colonial economic system, enabling Western powers to amass wealth and power at the expense of their colonies. The legacy of this exploitation continues to impact former colonies, contributing to ongoing economic disparities and social challenges.
While the extraction of resources and labor formed the foundation of colonial wealth accumulation, it was only the beginning of a much larger and more complex system of exploitation. Western powers also employed a range of economic policies and trade practices designed to further enrich themselves at the expense of their colonies. These practices were meticulously crafted to hinder the economic development of their colonies, ensuring that wealth flowed in one direction, towards the colonizers. These policies, often collectively referred to as mercantilism, aimed to maximize the flow of wealth into the colonizing country while minimizing the economic benefits for the colonies. By restricting the economic autonomy of the colonized, these policies ensured that the colonies remained subservient and economically dependent. One of the central tenets of mercantilism was the establishment of monopolies and exclusive trading rights, which were heavily enforced. Colonial powers granted themselves exclusive rights to trade certain goods with their colonies, effectively shutting out competition and dictating the terms of trade to their advantage. This monopolistic control allowed European merchants to purchase raw materials from their colonies at artificially low prices, ensuring minimal costs for maximum profit. These raw materials were then shipped back to Europe, where they were manufactured into goods that were sold back to the colonies at inflated prices. This created a trade imbalance that ensured a steady flow of profits back to Europe, further enriching the colonizers while impoverishing the colonies. Furthermore, colonial powers often prohibited their colonies from developing their own industries or trading with other nations, effectively stifling any potential for economic independence. This deliberate suppression of industrial development ensured that colonies remained dependent on the colonizer for manufactured goods, creating a cycle of dependency that was hard to break. The enforcement of these trade laws further cemented the unequal power dynamic, making it nearly impossible for colonies to achieve economic self-sufficiency. These policies stunted the economic growth of colonized regions, leaving them economically crippled and unable to compete on a global scale. This perpetuated their dependence on the colonizer and contributed to the global economic disparities that persist today, creating a legacy of inequality that continues to affect former colonies.